This is Event Masters. Behind the scenes stories, experiences, and lessons shared by the world's leading event experts. Hosted by Christian Napier.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Christian Napier, and I am super excited to welcome our next guest. Today's guest is an amazing person. I've known her for more than 2 decades, and it's the incomparable Maureen Sweeney. Maureen, how are you?
Very well. Excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, I am honored to have you, and let me tell you and everybody who's watching why. I got to go to the bio here. Now, your bio says you've got 20 years experience developing and executing high-end meetings, events, and trips around the globe. But I know you've been involved in this event space for even longer than that. Not that I want to age you or anything like that, because that's not it. But all right. So hospitality, language services.
Yep.
And we've done a lot of work together on that one, and event planning. So when it comes to this, you're dealing with the VVIPs, the true VVIPs. And when we get to some of these organizations, you're going to know who some of these VVIPs are. You'll just understand how VIP they are. Lots of work on interpretation program development, dignitary delegation handling. Your bio says you've held senior level staff positions and advisory roles with multiple Olympic organizing committees. Well, it's basically all of them since Atlanta.
I didn't do Greece, so I can't say all of them.
All right. What were they thinking? They should have been using you.
I know.
Sorry to my friends in Athens.
I didn't want to go.
And in addition to that, you've also served for over a decade, or you served for over a decade as the advisor to the International Olympic Committee for Protocol and Language Services. You've also worked on European Games, the Warrior Games, Pan American Games, World Equestrian Games, my goodness, World Boxing Championships, the Chicago Olympic bid. I was working for Rio, sorry. The U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee and the Utah Olympic bid, which is ongoing and hopefully will be settled soon. Fingers crossed. And then in addition to all of this Olympic and sports stuff, you provided services for a lot of other high-profile international organizations. So 2020 Expo in Dubai, here come the VVIPs, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Lives and Livelihoods Foundation, Clinton Global Initiative, and the Paul Allen Family Foundation, and Vulcan. So you have arranged high-level delegations. We're talking about high-level government officials, visits to countries like Rwanda, Jordan, Senegal, Indonesia, Ethiopia, Morocco, and Tanzania. Wow. And
crazy place.
In addition to all that, you are a founding partner at Tiller Language Services, a boutique translation and interpretation service provider. And when I was doing work with the IOC, on structured interviews, we used you a lot, and you always provide a great service there. And clients of Tiller Language Services include, organizations like NATO, Breakwater Strategy, GMMB, 2026 World Cup United Bid, Airbnb, International Olympic Committee, Five Currents, our friends Scott Givens, Jet Set Sports, iLuca, Gates Ventures, this little app that maybe some people have heard of called TikTok. I don't know if anybody's heard of that one. Parent company ByteDance, the Global Nurses Union, VMLY&R, and a ton of others. All right.
You're making me tired, Christian.
Well, basically, this episode is just me reading your bio, and then we'll just wrap it up.
That is going to be a boring
But I'm not done, because you also hold a master's degree in international public administration from our friends at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies, and a bachelor's degree in international relations from the University of Oregon. Go Ducks! I'm sad to witness the demise of the Pac-12, and your Ducks heading off to Big Ten land, and my Utes heading off to Big 12 land. But That's the way it goes with college sports. And this isn't in your bio, so I hope I'm not violating any confidences here, but she has an amazing family, and her daughter's heading off to France
Yes.
next month for study abroad,
Yeah,
and she's an amazing hockey player as well. So,
absolutely. The best.
okay, did I leave anything out,
Oh
Maureen?
my God. No, that's plenty. No, that's
Okay, so now we got to go back to the beginning and ask you, well, how in the world did you get involved in all this stuff?
oh my gosh. Wow. That's so funny. Well, I have an unlikely list of experiences that probably started in a sort of unlikely way. So, I grew up in Oregon. I'm an Oregonian, not in Portland. You say Oregon, and everyone says, oh, you must be from Portland. I grew up about as far away from Portland as you could be and still be in Oregon. So I'm from Medford, which is very close to California, southern part of Oregon. Nothing international going on. Never went on an airplane until I was probably in my late teens, early 20s. So it certainly wasn't something I was born into. Events, I would say that I got into events because when I was in between years at college, I would come home to live in Southern Oregon, and I was looking for a fun, interesting summer job. And our local historical society ran at the time several living history museums. I don't even know if I've ever told you this story, Christian, and you've heard a
I've
lot about
not
my
heard this.
background.
No, this is new stuff.
This is new stuff because I was really thinking about this answer. Um, and I went and applied because I had always done plays and acting and stuff like that in high school. And I got a job working at one of the living history museums. It was called the Beekman House, and they ran the house as if it were 1911. And they hired me to be the maid, Louise, and I would do in character tours of this historic house. And I would also cook on the wood stove, recipes from the time period. Anyway, so I got this experience doing tours and events. We had a lot of international guests because a lot of people would come through groups of, I used to make jokes about how I'm probably on the walls of hundreds of Japanese people who took photos of me in my little outfit. But I really, really enjoyed that job. And as I worked longer at the Historical Society, they would pull me in to, it's a local community type place. So they'd be like, hey, Maureen, can you come do this fundraiser and run the registration desk, or can you help with guest check-in? And it was super fun, and I really, really liked it. So then a few years later, when I went off to graduate school, I needed a job, and I got an on-campus job in the development office. And the development office, as many of us know with a nonprofit background, is, fundraising, and there was a lot of events, and I was the helper on every single event. So creating the collateral, the invitations, checking people in, serving wine, all of that kind of stuff. And I really feel like through those two experiences, along with the international relations that I was studying at the Middlebury Institute, it was kind of like a perfect combo to then jump into events. And the event side of it was really, and this is a story you've already heard. I graduated from the Institute in 1994. and that year, I was working for a local nonprofit looking for an international job. And I would still go back to the career development office at the Institute and try to find that perfect job. And I came one day and there was a listing that said the chief interpreter for the Atlanta Games, the Atlanta Olympic Games, is doing interviews for interpreters on site. You can sign up. That was back when there used to be like a sheet on the wall where you like signed your name. And it did say in big red letters, if you're not an interpreter, please do not sign up. These interviews are for interpreters only. I just chose not to read that part. And I signed up, went in. Long story short, I really hit it off with the chief interpreter, and he ended up hiring me to be his assistant. So that was really my entree into the international world of events. Hired to go and work for the Atlanta Games, supporting the chief interpreter. We had several hundred interpreters there, and that was it. That's how I got in. I
Now,
snuck in.
okay, but a lot of people get into this. Some maybe serendipitously, some maybe intentionally, but not everybody makes a career out of it. So you do these Atlanta Games, right?
Yeah.
You could go back to playing Louise and cooking things on a wood stove if you
Right?
wanted to in Medford,
I could
but
have.
you decided not to do that. So what happened that I don't know if it's inspired or motivated or led you to actually make this a career rather than kind of a one and done? I did these Atlanta Games. It was a lot of fun. Now I'm going to go back and put on my 1911 clothes and have a lot of tourists take pictures of me.
Oh, that's funny. So I think I did the Atlanta Games, and I got to the end and I went, wow, that was really fun. I really liked that. And I didn't mention this, but when I was at the University of Oregon, I was studying international relations. I spent 1 year abroad in South America perfecting my Spanish, and I think by that time I had realized, hey, I really like this international part of the job. I like the opportunity to meet people from other places, learn new things. And then going off to Atlanta, I realized that I liked that job too. So on the heels of the Atlanta Games, I ended up driving back from Atlanta to Medford, that was a really long road trip, but we drove through Salt Lake. And at that point, I knew, the Salt Lake had the games, and I was very keen to continue my experience. I actually got myself an interview. I came in. So from the time the Atlanta Games were done, I was already trying to figure out how I could get myself on board in Salt Lake. So I was fortunate. I came back, did the interview, then got to Salt Lake, or got home to Medford. I was there for about a year, still trying to convince Salt Lake to hire me, to be quite honest. And eventually they did, and then moved out here and did about a 3-year stint. I joined in 99 and wrapped up in 2002. And so I guess really my experience in Atlanta, I liked it enough that I knew it was something I wanted to do. And then getting the job in Salt Lake and really seeing it, because I only worked for Atlanta for a year, so it was more of a short-term experience. But the Salt Lake Games, I did, it was a soup to nuts, 3-year stint. So I really knew if I wanted to do it again. And when I got to the end of that, I think I was kind of like, okay, I'm in. And at that point I had to figure out, okay, how do I keep doing this kind of thing, but not have to keep moving around the globe? Because I had gotten married by then. My husband was like, I'll go with you places, but I don't. He saw a lot of my friends, a lot of your friends, a lot of people in the industry who've really, had to spend their life moving from games to games. And I knew that wasn't going to be for me. So I started kind of diving into how I could continue without having to move every 3 to 5 years.
So why don't we dive into that? How did you figure this out? Because you're right, there are people, sometimes they use that term. I don't know if it's a necessarily politically correct term anymore to use, but the term games gypsy, right? The term that it would just kind of move from one games to another, and we both have friends or colleagues that we've worked in the business for a long time. And
Yep.
that's what they do. They go live in Sochi for 3 years, and then they go live in Rio for a couple of years, and they just
Yep.
kind of go from one event to the next. But you said, I don't want to do that, but I still want to maintain or remain in this business, in this event
Yeah.
space. So how are you able to actually figure that out?
Yeah. Yeah. So after Salt Lake, um, I I intentionally was okay. We're not going to move. We're going to try to figure out what to do here. I was lucky because some of my closest colleagues in Salt Lake did go on to work in Torino, and they were people who knew my work and had seen what I did. And I was lucky because I was able fairly quickly um, after the Salt Lake Games to get kind of a contractor gig working with one of my former colleagues who is now in a more of a leadership position in Torino. I was also fortunate, I would say, in that my husband has a real job where he gets health insurance and a pension. And unlike a lot of people who don't have that and need that like secure full time or at least more than every once in a while type job to pay the bills, I had a little bit more flexibility. So I started working with Torino and then realized kind of, okay, I'm not full time here. I could offer my services up to some of these other events that are going on. So I was lucky at that point. I connected, it's kind of funny, about maybe it was one of the reunions, maybe like just 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. I connected back up with our friends at Five Currents, and they were working on the Clinton Global Initiative. They said, hey, oh, you're working part-time now. You're a contractor now. Could you do CGI with us? I think I had that anchor client in Torino, and then I was able to find like sort of my first small additional contract. And then my brain started going, oh, like maybe I have something here that I can put the word out to my friends and I can piece together different events. And I was fortunate to have done a couple of games. So I knew people who had either established a company or moved into a leadership position at the next games, etc. And I was in the fortunate position to be able to go to those people and say, hey, I've got some extra time. Here's some of the things I can do. You know that I'm not a flake. and kind of was able to build on the relationships that I had made at the two games where I did work full time. So.
All right. Well, this is really interesting because what you've done is you've showed us that there are a number of ways to actually be involved in this business, right? So you can work directly for the organizer of an event.
Yep.
Or the event owner. You can work as a contractor, as an individual consultant to that event, or subcontracting yourself through another company that provides services in the event space, which is what you did with Five Currents.
Yep.
Then you took it to another level because you, at some point in time, you actually started a company yourself.
Yes.
That is not just yourself, but actually has a team of people. And
exactly.
Full disclosure, my son is one of them.
Yes, and it's fantastic. We don't ever want him to leave. No,
And he's
I think
enjoying his time there. So tell us about that, the evolution of saying, okay, I'm gonna evolve from being the one-man show,
yeah,
the contract for hire consultant who's got clients and goes and does these things, to then say, well, I can still do that, but I'm actually going to take this to another level, and we're going to start a company that can provide services here. So tell us
yeah.
the story about how that came about.
It's long and winding too, of course. So yeah, I went from being a full-time employee, then I started working as a hired gun, essentially. And then eventually, let's see, I did Torino. I did as a contractor directly to the OCOG. Then I added some of these agencies doing other types of events like CGI. I worked in Beijing 2008, then again as a contractor to an agency. So let's see. I would say somewhere around 2010, because then we're getting up to Vancouver. Am I right? Is that okay?
Yeah.
I actually can't even remember. I had enough different pieces going that, I mean, I actually think it might have been my accountant who said, like, I mean, it's not very exciting, but he said, you've got to incorporate now. You need to be an LLC because you need to be able to write off your office space and your computer and your travel and that kind of thing. So the first thing I did was create my own LLC, which was just Maureen Sweeney Consulting. Just, it was just me, and it was for tax purposes. But then some of the people who were hiring me would say, well, we don't just want you. We would like you to cover this service, or we'd like you to bring a team. I mean, it was very helpful to be incorporated to be able to do that as well. And then, so I have another person sort of in my sphere who Christian also knows, named Todd, who hired me to do a lot of his events. I was hiring him to do a lot of my events. And at a certain point, we decided that we should partner up to kind of bring our two worlds together. So my world was more sports and a few big international events. His world was really the NGO and foundation side. He and I came together and now work together under the title of Tiller, or Tiller Language Services. So we kind of pooled our resources and realized we should be working as a team versus just like kind of one-off hiring each other. So it was a slow development. It was like just me as a consultant, me bringing a few people in under that consultancy, and then really coming together under Tiller Global. And then a few years later, expanding Tiller Global into two companies, Tiller and Tiller Language Services, which is like sort of the next evolution in the business of what I've been up to.
Which is a lot. It's a lot. Okay, we've got to get into some story time here. So you've told us the stories about your evolution of your career here, but let's go into some of the interesting experiences you've had in this fascinating event career of yours. What were some of the, share maybe one or two stories about some of the you always do this in a team. You can't deliver your thing in a vacuum, right? So examples of teams that you worked with, where you saw like great teamwork, leadership, some of those kinds of stories. Let's start there.
Oh my goodness. I was trying to think about this when I was looking at some of the questions that you sent over, and that was very helpful. Thank you. I think that one of the, maybe I'll tell you a story from like the very beginning of my career, just trying to think of what might be helpful to people listening. And then maybe something from later on when I had more of an idea of what I was doing. I don't know. So funny kind of fish out of water type, figuring it out story, I guess. When I was hired to work for the Atlantic Committee for the Olympic Games, my very first big event, it was kind of fascinating because I went into that interview that I mentioned earlier that I wasn't supposed to be at. I actually left the building thinking, wow, that was a very nice man, super interesting. I'll never hear from him again. And about 2 weeks later, I got a call back on the rotary phone, from someone who said, hi there, this is Susan from the Atlanta, full accent. I was completely thrown. And she said she was calling to offer me a job as the assistant to the chief interpreter. And I said, what? And then took the job, ultimately flew out to Atlanta. At this point, I think I was 24 or 25. I had never been to Atlanta. I got an apartment somehow over the phone, got an airplane, landed, had to find where I lived. There are a lot of funny stories there. Showed up at the office, which had craziness just in and of itself, because I had no idea how to I didn't have a car. I didn't know how to get from where I lived to downtown Atlanta. Anyway, showed up and started working with very little background. And the very first thing that they threw me into was the World Wrestling Championships. For anyone who knows anything about wrestling, which I did not, wrestling is one of the original Olympic sports, and almost every single country in the world has a wrestling team. So you're talking about a huge operation. And they assigned me to be the on-site manager of language services, which turns out covered, I think, close to 30 languages with volunteers. And I'm like this little 25-year-old blonde girl from California who's got no idea. So I sort of dove in and I started trying to pull my teams together. And the World Wrestling Championships is also interesting in that there's a lot of rules for this event that have to do with the fact that you have people coming from very sort of low-income countries, right? So the rules include, at that time, that the hotel needed to be within a certain distance from the venue and had to be under something like $82 a night. I mean, even in 1995, $82 a night was not a very fancy hotel. So we were staying at, I don't know, it's some equivalent of a Motel 6 or something, right next to the bus station in downtown Atlanta. So it was an area that I would probably not have frequented ever. And then to sort of facilitate the arrival of over 100 teams of international wrestlers, which was also a little bit shocking, because if you don't have an experience in wrestling, you don't understand, wrestlers are an interesting group. They have, the ears that are ball. I didn't even know what that was. I didn't know what was going on. I was like, what's wrong? What's happening? Wrestlers also, when they're in international competition, they need to keep their weight where it needs to be. It's all based on weigh-ins. And so there were people, throughout the event who were running around with their whole body wrapped up in plastic wrap, trying to not to sweat and that kind of thing. And I was in charge, essentially, of a good 50 volunteers speaking 30 languages for 100 teams of wrestlers from around the globe. And talk about being thrown in without any kind of idea. We really, I would say I saw the value of having a truly multilingual and multicultural team of volunteers available at your event, because these guys showed up, and a lot of them from really small towns in Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, not speaking a lick of English, and really helping them to just do the basic things that they needed to do, on top of helping them to have an experience in the United States, which was like for some of them incredibly thrilling because they'd never, maybe even been outside their region. I I mean, it was kind of a make or break moment. I feel like you were either gonna kind of crumble and cry and go hide, or you were gonna, figure out how to help. We had a lot of emergency situations. Like the signs in the elevator did say, no more than 200 pounds. I don't know, like not 200 pounds, but like 7 people and 1,400 pounds. No one could read those. So by like the second day, the elevator was like stopping like a foot below because it was so crammed full of wrestlers. So then really quick, we had to translate all the signs into all 30 languages and post them because the elevator was like breaking. There was a lot of people sort of enjoying the opportunity to be out on their own. So there were parties going on that we would then need to go with security and our volunteers and say, hey, no screaming, no throwing things out the window. It was like my introduction to big international events was sort of, I feel like looking back, like it was like a make or break. Like you either love this and you're like, okay, or you say, okay, this isn't for me. And I think I was scared and it really, really pushed me, but it was so exciting and so interesting. And I felt like I really did add some value. So I got excited. So that's my like first event story. It was, whew.
Well, it's a fascinating story, and there are a couple of things there that resonate with me. Number one is that, yeah, that experience could have scared you off. You could have
Yeah.
said, "Well, that's really not for me," but you
Should
actually,
have.
it points out that it takes a certain kind of individual to actually survive and thrive in this kind of a business. Which
Yes.
really takes me to the second point, and you said this a couple of times in your retelling of this story, which is um, you felt like you were helping people, right?
Yeah.
That you were adding value, and I think coming at it from a perspective of I want to help, I want to serve these people, I want to make sure that they have a good experience. I
Yeah.
think that's really, really noble. And it actually takes me to another question for you, which is, as you have kind of, surveyed the career experience, over 20 plus years here, what have been some of those really heartwarming moments, where you felt like, yes, just like with the wrestlers, you know, we had an impact, we made a difference, we did something really, really valuable and helpful. And every time you think back to those experiences, you're like, this is why I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's super important, right? Because uh, you want to do something that's meaningful with your life, I think, or at least I do, um, and still fun. So I think for me, like that's sort of key. Like I want to do something that means more than just making money, and I want to have a good time. I want my job to be enjoyable. I want to feel like I'm like, oh no, I have to go to work. I don't like that. So I would say, yeah, that the wrestler thing was a quite an introduction. Since then, I would say, so the events that I do through Tiller, we really endeavor to make the majority of our events be sort of, I don't even know what the word is. Like they don't have to be around philanthropy, or they don't have to be around sort of development, but that is the area that we focus on. We try events with meaning. I would say we try to go for if we can. Not always, but in terms of which ones really stand out to me. I mean, there are so many cool things I've been able to be a part of. Um, I think there have been a few trips that we've done, particularly in Africa, where we are bringing either wealthy families or individuals, or we're bringing organizations, funding organizations, to see projects to sort of try and inspire them to fund those projects. And I would say there's definitely been projects where I knew at the end the people were going to give money to sustain those projects, and that is super cool. Like, I mean, some of them have been around, different diseases. I mean, honestly, like tuberculosis. We've done a bunch of trips around tuberculosis in Southeast Asia, where at the end people really came away with an understanding of how their money could make a real difference. And I think for trips like that, we try, the value that we try to add is that we'll say, okay, so this is a group of 7 philanthropists. They're sort of interested in health funding in Southeast Asia. Can you help us craft a trip that will allow them to get the end of that trip and feel like they know enough to feel comfortable making like a huge financial contribution? So then we go, we understand which diseases, for lack of a better term, are interesting to them. We find the hospitals or the programs that are tackling those issues. Then we find within those hospitals or organizations, we figure out like who's the best speaker, who's going to really like impact a guest. Because you can go, I mean, some doctors, some nurses are more impactful speakers than others. So you go, you find those people who can really tell the story like you do, and get it all set up, bring those people over. And I mean, I can think of a couple of different like nurses in particular. I'm thinking of some of the nurses that we dealt with in Indonesia around tuberculosis, and some of the nurses that we've dealt with in Africa around malaria, who, when they speak and they tell the guests about, the kids that they treat, and they show them the different wards, like there's not a dry eye in the house. And by the end of it, those people are like, oh my God, I want to fund that hospital. Oh my goodness, I want to like, contribute to training for a nurse's program or a doctor's program. So that is like the coolest when you get, because, a lot of times we do events and you don't necessarily see like the tangible results. You see a good event and you see people learning things and having a good time, but that's like an extra added bonus to then find out, oh, that person like ended up paying for this whole ward or this training program. On the sports side, I would say, the Olympics are always cool, but when I did the Warrior Games, that I didn't know that much about it, and going into the Warrior Games and seeing and learning the stories of all the different folks who had injuries and then were coming back and competing, like that event, if you ever need like to feel good, the Warrior Games is like, oh my gosh, like the stories of the veterans that come back and the stuff that you see them do and the camaraderie that they have, like being at an event where you have a lot of people who suffered the same kind of traumas or injuries, competing against each other and then going out and having a good time. Like, I have to say that event always comes to mind because I didn't really know much about it. And I walked in and I was like, oh my gosh, this this is so cool. It's like every day. It's one of those like crying every day, but in a happy way, because you see somebody who like lost their legs. It's serving in Afghanistan, and they're like winning gold medals, and I don't know. That one really got me. I really had so much fun, and I felt like this is pretty cool. So,
Well, I'm sitting here listening to these stories, and I can imagine someone who's going to be watching this or listening to this on Apple Podcasts or whatever, thinking to themselves, "This sounds too good to be true. This sounds amazing. I want this, right?" But you would probably be the first person to admit that it's not all rainbows and unicorns, right? It's
yeah,
hard work, and sometimes it can be very stressful, and sometimes you can get burned out, and sometimes you can work with people that are not pleasant to work with, and sometimes it just doesn't work and you
yeah,
fail. And I'm curious to ask about that, because we hear about how amazing it is, and it is, and that's why we
yeah,
are here, right? It's why you
yeah,
and I are still doing this stuff after all this time.
yep.
But but it's not all rosy, and so I'm curious if you've got any experiences, stories you can share where things didn't pan out.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a really, really, really good point, because I have seen over the years people who really, really think that they want to do events. I'm sure you've had this experience too, where I'm in an interview with somebody and they're like, my dream, I grew up in Vancouver and now the Vancouver Games are here and I really, really, really want to do this. And they're just going on and on. And then I ask them about their background, and their background is not super operational. Um, it's more like they've worked in fields where there are actually like procedures and like a clear plan and process. and and uh I think that, I mean, that if it's a different question, I'm probably jumping ahead here, but like I do think that it's important to understand that just because you like going to events or you like watching events on TV does not necessarily mean that you're going to like delivering events. And I feel like every time I've done the Olympics in particular, there are just as many people at the end. I'd say it's 50-50, right? Or hopefully it's 70-30 if I've done my hiring correctly. Like 70% of them are like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do anything else but this. It was amazing. And then there's a solid chunk of people who say, never again. Because it's long, long, long days. There's no book. There's no procedure to follow. As much as people like Christian and I who've done this many times try to really make things clear and have processes and procedures for people. I'd say that a good portion of the job is really like changing everything at the last minute, like being ready for those, like, okay, all the plans that we made right now no longer apply. What are we going to do? And being comfortable, like, just making stuff up, which, uh, in terms of things that I've done that have failed, like I do something every day that I fail at, but like, I think the most important thing is to understand that, I mean, I don't usually use the word fail just because I feel like that sounds so extreme. Like things just don't go to plan often. Or maybe the plan that you made was not the optimal plan. And I think um, being okay with accepting that and changing and moving forward, and not being somebody, not getting caught up in like blame. Like I'm always like, I don't really care who messed this up. I don't, or I'm happy to take full responsibility for this falling apart. Okay, we're done with that. Now we have to make a plan for what we're going to do, because you can't have an entire event not happen just because one thing didn't work. So my best example here, like, and the biggest, what felt like failure to me, was for the Vancouver Games. Um, opening ceremonies, which I was responsible for the presidential box of the opening ceremonies at the Vancouver Games. In that presidential box, you see it on TV every time you watch the opening ceremonies. This is the head of state of the country, the mayor of the city, the head of the IOC, all of the heads of every delegation. So, if Russia's coming, Putin's in the box. Maybe not now, but like the Queen, stuff like that. And for in Vancouver, the bus carrying that delegation of humans took a wrong turn because there were huge protests going on in front of where the bus was supposed to turn, and the bus didn't arrive on time. And when it did arrive, it dropped those people off not at the door adjacent to where they were supposed to sit on camera. They were dropped like 4 levels down at BC Place at an unknown entrance. And my job was to make sure that those people were sitting where they were supposed to sit for the first camera shot. And the TV show was being held because they couldn't do the shot. And so like the pressure, even now thinking about it, like it's one of those like, I remember being on the radio with the person inside the bus to try to identify where those people were going to get dropped off, finding my way down there, and then having to lead them from that door, which I'd never been to, on a floor I'd never been to the entry to their box. Had no idea how to get from that place to that place. So then had to find people who could lead me, had to walk with purpose and determination to get them through, lead them in when the NBC was having to hold the show. Like that was a pretty big failure on many people's parts. But it's like you can't start crying and go hide behind the couch. You have to be like, okay, so we're going to be late, but this is how late we're going to be, and this is how we're going to rectify this and make it as good as we can in the moment. So I feel like I got done with that, and I had some time alone in a closet with the door locked with my thoughts. But those kinds of things happen at most events. And I think it ties with the other question about like getting into this. You have to think about like, well, can I handle when those kinds, maybe not to that extent, but like the chairs don't get delivered or the mics all go dead, or like those are the kinds of things that we deal with. And if you're okay with that and you think it's kind of fun and you can recover, then this is a good career for you. But if you're the type of person who's like, that sounds awful, you're probably more normal than us.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. One thing that I wanted to ask you about is, and I want to ask everybody who comes on, is it's difficult to make it in this kind of work on your own. If you have someone who will champion your cause, who you can learn from, it's really helpful.
Yes.
I'm talking about mentors or people that were willing to take you under their wing. And so, and you may have, been able to kind of be on both sides of that fence, where you have been mentored by people, and you've also been in a position to help other people who are just starting out. And so I'm curious if you've got any stories or experiences to share about mentors or being a mentor yourself.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think the whole mentor thing is hugely important. And I think having a close, tight network that you support and supports you is also extremely important. So, I mean, from a mentorship perspective, I feel like, that person that I've mentioned or alluded to a few times that ended up hiring me as their assistant in Atlanta, Bill Weber, who's been involved with the Olympics since 1968, he really was the person that brought me in and mentored me and sort of allowed me to become part of his circle. And I can't thank him enough for it. Like, he and I are still extremely close. And then I feel like in the intervening years before I was able to sort of mentor and help other people, establishing that kind of network, because it is an unusual career where you don't have people in the office and a desk next to you. So you need to find those people that you like and that will help you and you can help, and will hire you and you can hire them, or will tell you about other events that are going on, really fostering that network. So I feel like people like, Christian and I are part of that support network for each other. We have many other friends. I really, like, from the beginning, I have made that a part of what I do. I know Christian has as well. I spend a certain amount of time per week, every week, since I created my own consultancy, and even beforehand, just connecting with people that I know and like, and not with the expectation that they're going to give me work immediately, or not with anything, like always trying to have lunch with people who are nearby, seeing people when you go into other cities, sharing information in the hopes that they will share information with you. I think that I just can't even overstate how important that is. And I think Christian and I are on the same page there very much. Now, yeah, I absolutely, like, I want to be able to help people the way that people help me. You gotta pay it forward. And it's also hugely helpful, like, the people that you want to mentor are going to be people that you think are going to be the leaders in your field. So, it's funny, Bill Weber, who brought me into this industry, always makes this joke at meals or toasts or things. He always says, I hired Maureen, and got her first couple of jobs so that she would hire me for the last 15 years and get me lots of jobs, essentially. So, yeah, I think that because as a freelancer or an owner of a small company or consultancy, you don't have that, you know, uh, sort of colleagues sitting around you in cubicles. You've got to foster that on your own. And I have seen, I feel like I can just like verify that, like, the people out there who wanted to kind of do what I'm doing, what Christian's doing, like what some of our other very successful friends are doing, but didn't succeed, are the people who just really didn't like that part of the job. Like, they felt guilty reaching out to people, or they felt weird about, like, setting up lunches and phone calls. And I think it's so incredibly important, because you have to, market yourself, and you can't do that on your own. You need like a team supporting you.
I think that's very well said. As we come down to the home stretch of our conversation here, before I get to my final couple of questions, did we leave anything out? Are there any stories that I've missed that you're like, I'm dying to tell this story. I've been waiting years to tell this story. I need to tell this story.
Oh, oh, no, I have a couple that might be good for like the late night version. I don't know. I can tell you one that's Sally. My daughter Sally was like, "Oh, you have to tell the story about Morocco," and uh, it's pretty funny. I guess I'll have to tell you. So I did an event, a learning trip in Morocco with a group called the Lives and Livelihoods Fund that Christian mentioned at the beginning. They're a group of rich Middle Eastern countries, or more wealthy, developed Middle Eastern countries. This organization then makes large financial contributions to more developing or lower income Muslim countries. So they wanted to go to Morocco, which does fairly well. I mean, they're not necessarily like a super poor country, but they have some this group was interested in learning about their sort of they've been very successful in cooperative farming, and they wanted to learn about different types of farming that was happening around Morocco, kind of to look at as a model and also to support those projects that were working really well. So we were out in the country looking at like olive groves, and there was a ladies cooperative that did herbs, and it was really, really cool. And I was doing the advance, meaning that on the day of the trip around Morocco to see the different places, I would jump ahead of the delegation, meet with the main people, make sure everything was in order. And then I would be texting with my team that was coming in the van with the actual guests to have their presentation. Because we would only have, say, an hour to 2 hours at each site to make it through the day. So the morning went great. We went and saw some olive growers in the morning. I got there, checked everything out. The two most engaging guys are there. I can text. I make the entry to the guests. It's great. Then I jump in the car, go to the next site. It's the ladies cooperative. We're having lunch there. We're eating the lunch that includes the herbs that's been grown. I get them all in. I get them seated. They have their food. It's all fantastic. I jump ahead to the last site. The last site is this awesome guy who is a beekeeper, and he has all of these bees. The site is fantastic because he's extracting the honey, right? So he pulls out the thing, puts it in the machine, it goes through, the honey comes out. They're going to talk to him about how he does it, and takes the different swarms, different places, collects the honey. He has the honey for them to eat. He has goodies made out of the honey. It's like the grand finale. I get there. The guy doesn't speak a lick of English, by the way, but is the nicest guy. I get there on my own. We're having our little sign language phone conversation, about ready to go. I'm like, you know what? I need a bio break. You can cut this out if you need to, but it's so funny. So I'm going to put my hand sanitizer. I'm going to use so this is rural Morocco. So we're in not a real bathroom. We're in a pit toilet. I go to the back. I'm going to go there. I'm going to come out, and then I'm going to text and say, we're all ready to go. And I go in, and I didn't realize that my Apple iPhone was in my back pocket of my jeans.
Oh.
Or I could text the delegation, which includes like secretaries of, high level finance people from 8 different Middle Eastern countries. My phone, I hear a shquonk. That was my worst day of doing events in the 25 years I've done this. Because at that moment, like they don't want to arrive. There's like cameras. They don't want to show up without that text. Like that motorcade is waiting for that text call. So the hardest thing that I've done in my 25 years was to lean over and pick my phone up out of that location and make a text call. I'm sorry, Christian, you can edit.
Wow. Oh,
But that
okay.
story was so good.
That's worth it. Yeah.
And they got the text, they came, everything was fantastic. I never told anyone what happened until the debriefing, and I won best story of the trip.
Okay, so pun intended, that's a really crappy story.
It was a crappy thing.
I'm glad that the phone was actually an arm's length.
I was too.
You could reach it, because sometimes if the pit's too deep, what are you going to do?
I was very happy that I could reach it. Yes. And it still worked. And that I had that would lead to another piece of advice when you're doing events. Always have like wet wipes in your kit.
phone always in the front pocket and always
And
have wet
put your
wipes.
phone in your front pocket. Don't put it in your back.
Okay, so that's probably the most important advice we've received all day. You shared a lot of advice, and that is, one question that I do have is, aside from all the advice that you've already shared, is there any other advice that you'd like to share with someone who is contemplating potentially working in this industry?
I would say do some events before you make that decision, because like I was saying, when I've interviewed some people in the past, I can tell from the interview, based on what they've been spending their whole life doing, that they're probably really not going to like the job. They just have an idea of what the job is. So I would say, if you really want to do events, like even go do some little events, like volunteer. If you're in college, go work in the development office or work in the athletics department, and go volunteer somewhere to do an event, because you really, it's really not what you think it is. It's fun and exciting, but it's if a sports event isn't doing sports. A celebrity event isn't being a celebrity. You know what I mean? Like, you truly are doing a very separate job from what the content of the event is about. And I think I see people who love playing sports, so they think that they're going to enjoy working at the Olympics, and they don't. I mean, some do, but it's a common misconception. And I think even doing events on a very small scale, they do replicate that kind of, like, having to make last minute decisions, everything changing, things going wrong, being able to think on your feet, not having like any kind of guidebook to follow. Make sure you really like that. That's my, and if you like it on a low level, like a small scale, not a low level, that sounds bad, but on a smaller scale, you'll probably like it on a bigger scale. Like, how much did the stress that you went through bother you? If the stress kind of got you excited, you're probably a good candidate. If the stress made you go like, I need more rules or details or guidelines, then maybe not.
Well, it actually, I said we were wrapping this up, and gosh, we've been going an hour here, but I have to ask one other question, because when you were talking about that, I was thinking to myself, one of the things that could be a turnoff for some people, but actually is a big motivation for me, is if you enjoy active learning. Then this
Oh,
is
I like
this,
calling it that.
then it can be fun. And the example that I would give is you bringing me on to Tokyo to do this junior interpreter program thing.
Yep.
It had never been done. I don't know anything about working with simultaneous interpreters other than having used them as, you and being a service provider and having some interaction with interpreters, but actually, developing this kind of a program or something. I mean, I never did anything like that. And you, I think, half jokingly asked if I'd be interested, and I half jokingly said, well, sure. But
job offer to you.
but it turned out to be, for me, it was a really great experience, and it gave me an opportunity to learn something that I had not done
Yes.
before.
Yep.
And so I enjoy that. I enjoy learning, having these opportunities to learn how to do new things. And I think working at events provides ample opportunities for you to stretch outside of your comfort zone and learn to do new things, if you're willing to do that, because the opportunities will be there. And so that actually leads me to the question for you, which is, you came into this industry as a grad student, and you developed a number of skills over a period of time, and maybe you have some experience or stories that revolve around you getting an opportunity to learn to do something new that you didn't know before. Aside from the wrestling one, you told us the wrestling one, and I thought it was all new, right?
All new. Every single
But you
thing.
could have just like, I'm going to stay here in my lane and I'm going to do the thing that I'm really good at doing. But you've advanced your career because you've been willing to take on things that maybe hadn't been done before, or do things that you hadn't done before. And so I'm just curious if you've got any experiences you'd like to share around that, the
Yeah.
acquisition of new skills and uh, uh, knowledge.
Yeah. I think I mean, it's a really great comment that you just made. Like, I do think that is one of the reasons, similar to you, that I love doing this, because every event, I feel like, with the exception of those that are very like sort of the dry kind of corporate get-togethers or whatever, you do get to learn something new that you dive into, I would say for almost every one of these learning trips that I've done, um, I mean, we've had a few where like we've had 3 or 4 tuberculosis related trips or 3 or 4 malaria related trips. Like, you really, even though you're not the content expert on those trips, you can't seem like a dummy, because the guests are going to ask you too, right? So, and you can't every single time say like, well, why don't we talk to Bob, who's the preeminent expert in malaria research? They want you to say like, so why don't we do X? Or how come some people get bit by mosquitoes more than others? Like, you have to have that like basic knowledge. And I like you, like I love that, right? It's not boring. It's not like so in terms of learning something new, I honestly feel like every event, with the exception of those that are more like an annual meeting or something, I've had to spend time learning about the content of the event that I was delivering. And I love that. I would say, in terms of just learning something brand new, you bringing up Tokyo is a good example. Tokyo, I feel like me and everyone on the team had to learn so many new things. We had to learn how to deliver an event in a, pandemic situation. And my program, I mean, for Tokyo, I was initially hired to deliver the interpretation services for the Olympics, which I'd done many other times in the past. But then it started changing on a weekly basis. They came to us first and they said, okay, we don't want people to use, usually for simultaneous interpretation, you hand out these headsets and then you check them out, check them back in. They didn't want to do that because it's the pandemic. You don't want to stick something in your ears that somebody else just stuck in their ears. So they said, can you come up with a application that will allow people to use their own headphones? So that was sort of the first step. Okay, how can we had this app, how do we make it so that people can use it for headsets? Then, we had always had on-site volunteers. Well, guess what? We're getting rid of all the live volunteers. We need something to replace them, but we can't pay as much as we need for those high-level professional interpreters who are doing simultaneous interpretation. What should we do? And I mean, to be honest, like, I kind of made something up along with my my partner Alex, which morphed into the junior interpreter program. That then, Alex and I had come up with this sort of general idea and a general concept, and then we hired Christian, who really then took that concept of, okay, we're going to use recent graduates, we're going to use people who are maybe still in interpreting school, they're going to do consecutive interpretation over the internet. Okay, Christian, take this concept and turn it into an actual program. And then they said, oh, and guess what? We need, for every group over 20 that are traveling to Tokyo, there has to be a COVID liaison officer that makes sure all the COVID rules are followed. And we were fortunate that Christian had a son that we hired, and that was made up too, frankly, because we were bringing 85, 90 people over to Japan. And what should that program look like? Like, what do we need to tell people to do? What are the, and all of that happened, in the year between when we were supposed to deliver the Olympics and when we really did. So it was all active learning and active like development. It's almost like the most extreme example. But I do feel like for all events, there is, if you're good, that the value that you can add to your client is to really digging in and understand not only their content, but like, okay, you've always done it this way, but what if you did it this way? Here's some new ideas and suggestions, and it'll make your event better. And it'll be something new and interesting for me to add to my toolbox for the next people that I go and offer an event to. So it's huge. That's a hugely good point. And I think that's like another way to be a good, get your foot in the door and have good ideas and be open and creative and think about not just doing everything the way that it's always been done.
All right. Well, okay. My last question, and we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, which is if you had a chance to do it again, what would you do differently? So that's my last question. I'm curious to hear your response to this, because you're like, I'm not exactly sure I'm going to answer that question or how I'm going to answer that question. It reminded me of the quote. I don't know if you remember the movie Incredibles, a Pixar movie.
Yeah.
And there's a character in there named Edna Mode, and she's like the fashion designer for the superheroes. And she has this quote in there where she says, "I never look back, darling. It distracts from the now." Right. So, so at the risk of getting that kind of answer, I'll go ahead and ask the question anyway. If you had to look back, would you do anything differently?
Like I said before we got on air, I am a little bit like that. I'm very much a like look ahead person. And maybe that means I'm not very reflective, but I feel like, I don't think there's a big thing that I would do differently, honestly. Like I'm pretty happy with how things have played out in my career. I feel like I have made some good choices, but I've also gotten lucky. So, if you give up, if you change your choices, maybe your luck would have changed too. So you can't mess with the past. No, I don't know. I think maybe, I mean, it would always have been nice to know some of the things when you're older, when you were younger, right? I mean, that adds another level to it. But like, if I could have known when I was young, what I know about just kind of not getting, like, staying calm, not getting so anxious. I don't know. I think that, but I believe like that level of calm that maybe you have more of when you're older. You have to live through all the pain of your youth to like acquire that wisdom and knowledge. So I guess I'm just going to say, no, I mean, I could have made a lot of different decisions that maybe would have made me more money or got me somewhere else, but I'm not messing with that. I'm happy with where I am, and there's no point in second guessing at this point. It's too late.
Well, you're in a great place. You're in a fantastic place, Maureen, and you've helped so many organizations, so many events, so many people. And if people, maybe they're planning future events, maybe they need interpretation, maybe there are new people that are, considering getting into this business, and they're like, wow, Maureen sounds amazing. I really need to connect with her. What's the best way for people to reach out and get in touch with you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to have people email me. Maureen at sweeneyglobal.com is the best way to get a hold of me. And yeah, I'm happy to share anything I might have learned over the past 20 years. And, you know, I'd be happy to hear from folks. So.
All right, fantastic. We'll put that email down in the show notes so people can see that without having to watch an hour of video to find out what your email address is. With that, thank you so much for dedicating so much of your time to share so much of your knowledge and experiences and your stories with us. I really appreciate it, Maureen. Thank you very much. And listeners and viewers, please like and subscribe to our humble little podcast here, and we'll catch you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Christian. That was super fun.